Dear Professor, the microphone is yours.
Mr. President, Science, the Academy of the Kingdom of Morocco, members, my colleagues, friends, my large family. I'm living proof here that even with the accumulated street wisdom, experiences of 90 years, that at my age, I can still be manipulated and outmaneuvered by the young ones. You may have heard the president mention, apologize briefly about something, a feature of this gathering, this seance, the program. He apologized, but even that was a fraction of the full truth. It's true that I said that I wanted to listen to young poets. That's true. And I warned this one sitting here that I'm not coming here to make speeches and that I am not going to sit around to hear myself being spoken about positively, negatively, critically, laudably, that I do not have that temperament. And I said to him, you know, why don't you substitute for this part of the program, the laudation? Why don't you let us hear the voices of the young poets of Morocco? And I even so generously offered to sit among them and even read one or two poems with them. And he said, yes, we'll do just that. But he omitted to say that he was getting the poets to read poems about me. Now, I ask you, what is the difference between reading poetry about a monotheme and having what you might call academic sessions on that person's work? There's absolutely no difference. So in other words, he was truthful, and at the same time, he was a liar. And I will deal with him when we get back to Nigeria.
It's punishment.
But seriously, what a delight, what an honor, even this manipulation. This is what I call creative manipulation. And I have no objection to creativity, even when it outplays me. At sessions like this, of course, inevitably, there are questions. In fact, when I was seated over there, one of our colleagues came over and said she had 2 questions for me. Now, even before that question is posed, other questions, I'm going to give an answer to what I consider a just and perennial question, which crops up all the time, and which is legitimately addressed to any person of any form of creative productivity. And that question is usually why? Why? What makes you do this? What makes you the kind of public entity that you are? What is the driving force? I hate to use the word philosophy, it's too grand. Let's just say a propelling ideal, and that's good enough for me. There are 2 mainly. I would respond very honestly and frankly. One is the fact that very early in life, at some stage or the other, I recognize the fact that there is a propelling axis, both of history, of relationships, of even productivity, of even the understanding and recognition of other human entities. And this is simply what I describe as the axis of power and freedom. In other words, power at one end, and on the other, freedom. No matter what the ideology is, whether secular or theocratic, whether considered progressive or reactionary. I came to understand quite early, even before I could articulate it, that there is one propelling axis which revolves, that the world itself, humanity itself, revolves around, the polarities between freedom and power. And whether we like it or not, we're obliged to choose. And I chose. And if I can claim credit for any consistency, it is that I have stuck with that polarity. And that nothing that I've experienced, either in my own life or read in history or absorbed through creative words in any form, nothing has occurred of sufficient weight of analysis, of understanding, and even intuition to make me change that polarization, to make me look for any other axis for the explication of the human phenomena, or indeed sometimes even the relationship between nature around us and we as human beings. That's one. Two, some decades ago in Nigeria, something unusual was discovered. Unusual, I use that ironically, because for me there was absolutely nothing unusual in the discovery or the encounter, more accurately, of any other human beings. But what happened in the middle belt of Nigeria was that a tribe, quote unquote, was discovered, which somehow had escaped, should we say, the modernization, the quote unquote progressive advance of society. I forgot the name now. And in fact, I borrowed from the references we made a few times today to my latest work, prose work, Chronicles from the Land of the Happiest People in the World. I actually utilize, with my own creative distillation, a character from that particular so-called primitive tribe, which was still supposed to be, if you like, in the Stone Age. And my contention, again, this other recognition which I have, is that between an individual from that community, that newly discovered but isolated community, living still a rudimentary existence with its own set of ethics, productivity, however rudimentary, human relationship, its own curative discoverers. In other words, whatever scientific, what we consider technological scientific discoveries, the rest of community had made, that society, that rudimentary society, for me, produced its own forms of existence, had continued to survive despite everything going on around that isolated portion of the middle belt of Nigeria, that they retained one thing tied them to the rest of society, wherever on the globe, and that is their humanity. And so between this quote unquote primitive, or shall we say unadvanced citizen of that little community, between that individual and the most sophisticated, most celebrated astronaut or rocket scientist, to use the commonest expression, there is absolutely no difference. That they're bound together by that common factor, that essence that we call humanity. And that, for me, is the basis of community, of society, of state, anywhere in the world. And that it is almost blasphemous to consider one superior to the other simply because of certain advances, either in what we call the humanities, more sophisticated, architecture, painting, music, etc. And the astronaut, which for me, by the way, represents the highest form of scientific, technological know-how and inventiveness that humanity has come across. I'm a space nut. I follow launches of rockets every day. I admire astronauts to the extent that I even mug photographs with them whenever possible. It pays me back for people wanting photographs with me. And so that has been the guiding philosophy, or shall we say, enabling principle of my existence and my creativity. A recognition of the commonality of all human beings, wherever and at whatever age. And that it just happens that owing to certain environmental facilities, encounters with other people, that we consider some more sophisticated than the other. These are just words. Basically, it's a common humanity. And if you pluck an individual from that so-called primitive environment, and you put that individual in company of astronauts, the aptitude is always there. And sooner or later, we'll encounter phenomenal revelations of the productive capacities of this so-called backward society. This, for me, has always been my interpretation of even historical events and so-called technological advance, and it runs parallel to that understanding of the polarity between power and freedom. In other words, we live in a world where there's always a tendency towards domination, using whatever excuses happen to be available, whether because one side follows a spiritual construct that we consider advanced over other spiritual constructs, which enable us to look down on religions which we're encountering for the first time, however ancient, and say that those who follow that religion deserve to be dominated and brutalized by others within the same human environment. This basic sketch of understanding, of exploration, and utilization, for me, define the scaffolding of my work, whether as playwright, as poet, as essayist, satirist, and even as failed musician, failed architect, and failed astronaut, because those are areas in which, given another round of 90 years, I will explore more productively than I have done at this time. So beyond that, I have no excuse of having outlived some of my colleagues, whom I'm internally celebrating, and with whom I'm sharing this remarkable honor. I regret so much that writers are not granted certain advantages over others. I mean, they should have the privilege of being with us all the time, physically. However, that is not granted. We accept it. And I dedicate this event to all my colleagues who passed away. You've honored me. You're honoring just not me, but that occupation of contributing to humanity in our own very unique, sometimes exasperating, sometimes irritating, sometimes even contradictory means. By this kind of event, you're telling us that we're essential to society and to humanity in general. I thank you, and I'll be back. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Wole Soyinka. Vous nous avez indiqué que vous détestiez les manipulations et que